Hello, this is John Miares with the USDA NASS Great Lakes Regional Field Office in East Lansing, Michigan. In this presentation, I will be providing a brief overview of the questions that are part of Section E1. For more detailed information, please consult your interviewer's manual. Also, a separate standalone PowerPoint presentation without narration is available on the Purdue site, which has more detailed information in the individual questions being asked in this section. For those enumerators who have worked ARMS 2 for several years, you know historically that the short form interview was over after question 16 in Section E. Starting in 2019, several new questions were added to the Production Practices Report at the request of USDA's Office of Pest Management Policy, also known as the OPMP. The OPMP is tasked with understanding grower pest management practices. This understanding helps support the availability of pest management tools to growers. The OPMP requested that several new pesticide management questions be included starting for the first time on both the 2019 Wheat ARMS 2 survey as well as the 2019 Fruit Chemical Use survey. The intention is that these questions will now be standard on all ARMS 2 short forms and both the fruit and vegetable chemical use surveys. As far as we know, these questions will not be included on the long form or the PPCR in the future. There are questions about strategies used to reduce spray drift, maintenance on sprayers, use of hedgerows and windbreakers, and how growers communicate with each other regarding reduction of spray drift. Until fairly recently, it was thought that pesticides applied to agricultural fields were broken down or tied up before they could reach groundwater. However, the development of extremely sensitive detection methods has led to the discovery that commonly used management practices may lead to small amounts of pesticides contaminating ground and surface water supplies. Since rural residents depend upon these water supplies, agricultural producers need to exercise a high level of management in order to avoid contamination. Since pesticides are an important tool for most farming operations and cleaning up contaminated groundwater is extremely difficult, producers need to evaluate their use of pesticides and adopt best management practices that are appropriate for their crops and the site. Fortunately, a number of crop management and pesticide application practices are available that can be used to reduce potential contamination of water supplies. Many of the questions in this section are designed to determine grower engagement in the use of best management practices, but please emphasize to the respondent that it is okay if the operator isn't implementing one of these practices, and the respondent shouldn't feel pressured to provide an answer when a practice isn't being implemented. If the respondent refuses these questions, take good notes as to what was refused versus simply writing what was unknown by the operator. If the operation hires custom sprayers to apply all the pesticides, the operator may not have the information on hand to be able to answer the questions in this section. In this case, use the consent form to get permission from the operator to contact the custom sprayer to collect this information on his behalf. An extra blank copy of the questionnaire will be in each kit envelope in case you need to provide a copy for the respondent or the custom sprayer. Question 1 focuses on strategies used by producers to reduce spray drift. Examples of things they're asking for include altering spray times depending upon weather conditions, using drift-reducing adjuvants, using drift-reducing nozzles, calibrating sprayers either before or during the season, altering sprayer settings to manually improve precision, using shielded sprayers, or other technologies. Within each category, you're asked, was this practice used at all? Was it used specifically to reduce drift? How hard was it to implement this practice? And if the practice was not used, why not? For cases where something was not done, there unfortunately isn't a set of check boxes that you can use to specify why the practice was not used. You will have to list all of the codes that are relevant to the answer on the given line. For example, if adopting new technologies like GPS boom controls is going to cost too much due to labor and equipment, you would enter 12 into the line to indicate that both 1 and 2 were valid problems. If using code 6 for other reasons, you will need to enter in words what the other reason was for the grower to not apply that practice. Please note that these are limited to insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, and plant growth regulators applied to the selected field. Questions 2 through 4 ask for specific details about how ground boom sprayers were used. These questions also ask about the use of aerial sprayers, but if ground boom sprayers are not used, simply check the appropriate box at the top of the page and go on to the next question. The 3 questions distinguish between pre-emergent pesticides, post-emergent herbicides, and post-emergent insecticide or fungicide applications. Refer to section D to determine what was sprayed when and how. Parts A through E in this question are fairly straightforward and ask about typical spray volume, operating pressure, types of nozzles used, the boom height, and how fast the sprayer is driven. Part F asks about target droplet size spectrum for the pesticide applications. Apparently, there are 8 droplet classification categories that correlate to different color nozzles, 6 of which are common for agriculture and horticulture, including extremely fine, which is purple, very fine, which is red, fine, which is orange, medium, which is yellow, coarse, which is blue, very coarse, which is green, and extremely coarse, which is white, and finally ultra coarse, which is black. Generally, the smaller the droplet size, the higher the potential for drift. Of course, if the operator has all spraying done by custom applicators, you may need to get this information from whoever does the custom spraying. Questions 5 through 8 focus on the maintenance of sprayers, including questions on sprayer recalibration, when the boom sprayer tank system was cleaned, what the tank is being cleaned with, the types of nozzles that are used, and the frequency of nozzle replacement. As you go through the questions, please be sure to check all boxes that apply. We would prefer that respondents don't guess or make something up, but none of the above is a perfectly acceptable and valid response. Again, this is a question where the respondent may not have the information if they are using custom sprayers. Question 9 asks about the use of hedgerows or windbreakers for drift reduction. Hedgerows are a dense woody vegetation planted in a linear design to achieve a natural resource conservation purpose. In question 10, there is a table where the respondent is asked how often certain practices were used during the season to manage herbicide and insecticide resistance in the current year. These include field mapping or record keeping of field-level pesticide use, field management or sanitation practices, planting pest-resistant varieties of the target crop, pre- and post-harvest control of pests to prevent return, use of pest diagnostic tools or pest forecasting systems, and pesticide mode of action rotation or combination. For field mapping, there are several ways that an operator could be recording this information that would allow the respondent to answer this question with a yes. Some operators might just record the field history on paper, specifying what pests occurred in the field and where each year, and what products were used to control those pests. Other operators might be using GPS or other imaging systems to collect and store this data. Sometimes field mapping is done during harvest. Regarding the pesticide mode of action rotation or mode of action combination, growers are advised to rotate or combine pesticides with different modes of action where a different pesticide has a similar activity against the targeted pest. Each different mode of action is represented by a different number or letter which is displayed on the pesticide label, so a grower might either rotate or use a tank mix with a group 2 and a group 4 herbicide to slow resistance development. One of the challenges over the past several years is that Roundup, or glyphosate, which is probably the most commonly used herbicide anywhere, has been around for almost 50 years. When it was first developed, it was hailed as a once-in-a-century pesticide because it was so good and so effective at killing weeds. However, the idea of using it wholesale on crops didn't really grow until the introduction of glyphosate-resistant varieties of corn and soybeans in the early 90s and 2000s. The problem that has happened is that growers would just use Roundup exclusively on their fields, and the weeds have developed a resistance to it, so it is losing its effectiveness. Question 11 asks whether spraying practices for other fields in this operation are similar to the spraying practices used in the selected field. This question should ask about spraying practices for other fields where the targeted crop is grown, not just any field in the operation. Clearly, different crops require different spraying practices, so let's focus on the target crop in particular. Questions 12 and 13 are very similar to questions that have been asked on past forms regarding the source of pest management decisions. Please work with the operator to go through the list of possible sources of information in question 12 and focus first on which ones were used most often, then work backward to figure out which were either rarely or never used. If the respondent uses university cooperative extension resources at least some of the time, question 13 should be asked in order to help us determine which types of university or cooperative extension programs are growers participating in the most. Question 14 focuses on communication to reduce off-target impacts of spraying, and all you want to do is check all that apply. We're not sure to what extent this question is intended to look at how well farmers communicate to avoid disputes that led to the tragedy in Arkansas where one farmer shot and killed another over an argument related to dicamba drift destroying a soybean field. But with as much attention as there is to situations like that, and problems with pollinators getting sprayed inadvertently, it is good that they're tracking this information. Question 15 asks growers to look at specific best management practices, or BMPs, used by the operator when conducting spray activities. These particular best management practices are promoted by USDA, state departments of agriculture, and cooperative extension, but are not necessarily checking to see whether operators are in compliance with the law regarding appropriate application of pesticides, but also that operators are working to avoid non-point source contamination of water resources by agricultural pesticides, as well as protecting pollinators and their habitats. Finally, question 16 looks at different auditing systems that growers may participate in. Global GAP or EuroGAP and the SQF program are private sector bodies that set voluntary standards for the certification of production processes of agricultural products. There are other auditing systems which may not be food safety specific, but are also of interest and can be recorded in the Other Please Specify option. Of course, if the target crop is grown as a cover crop or is chopped for livestock feed, then there may be no need for such an audit to take place.